If there's one thing cinephiles love more than watching movies, it's making lists, especially lists of all the movies they haven't seen yet. But it's also easy for the old watch list to spiral out of control, with hundreds or even thousands of unwatched titles, which can become paralyzing. That's where these videos come in. Rather than a list of thousands, I tackle just 10 watch-listed movies, selected in part by me, and in part by my patrons, who collectively decided that watching Todd Solondz' happiness was a good use of my finite time on this planet.
You know, I've never seen that. I could never get past the title. It's not relentlessly cheerful, is it?
No, Batman, it most certainly is not. God, I've got some doozies ahead of me today. It's time to ask, who watches the watch list? The Killer has been on my radar for a very long time. Ever since I was first exposed to John Woo's Hard Boiled, I've been desperate for the kind of euphoric high only his brand of operatic, high-octane Hong Kong action flicks could provide. Unfortunately, distribution of Woo's Hong Kong films in the West has been spotty. I've never seen The Killer available streaming, or as a rental, or a physical copy out in the wild. I had hoped Woo's own remake of the film with Universal last year would have helped get the original in front of my eyes, but that didn't really happen. Thankfully, a friend came in clutch with an old Blu-ray. By his own admission, the picture quality was not great, and I could have just waited for the new 4K restoration Shout has announced. But no, I'm tired of waiting. I need The Killer now. With that need finally being met, I can confidently say I made the right choice. The Killer rules so hard. It's easy in talking about this movie to just turn into a drooling idiot, commenting about how awesome everything is. But I mean, if the shoe fits, Chow Yun-fat is awesome, the grand gunfights are awesome, the moody noir images of Hong Kong are awesome, Woo's doves are awesome, the whole thing is just one of the most intoxicatingly cool and entertaining film experiences I've had in recent memory. And despite the way The Killer may have melted my ability to talk about film intelligently, there is in fact a lot going on here. The catalyst of the story is master assassin Ah Jung accidentally blinding a nightclub singer during a hit, prompting a spiral of guilt and an attempt to make right what he has wronged. Compounding this is Ah Jung's own growing despair at the dwindling honor of the Triads, as they become little more than a savage gang, and the growing threat of Detective Lee Young, a cop in hot pursuit of Ah Jung, who may also be a kindred spirit. It's all a very pulpy exploration of masculinity and ethical codes, but Woo leans into the material with complete sincerity. It's operatic and over the top, but it's also deeply felt. A bit like if Michael Mann's movies more fully embraced melodrama. If that sounds a belittling comment, I certainly don't mean it to be. Quite the contrary, I was utterly swept up in The Killer. In its action, in its excitement, in its exploration of the sensitivity of tough guys, and the intimacy between them. This is the kind of film you can cheer along to, even when you're just watching it in your living room. Shout, get that new restoration out on Blu-ray already. I need it. I feel like I would have liked Dick Tracy at any age. As a child who loved the Tim Burton Batman movies, I would have loved the pulp and the battle between righteous good and abject villainy. As a young teen into comic books and comic book movies, I would have loved the film's general aesthetic of comic book panels translated directly to the screen. As an undergraduate, I would have admired just what a bold directorial swing the film was from Warren Beatty, the film offering an incredibly stylish look in its cinematography, costumes, and makeup. And now as an adult, I like all of these elements, while also being fascinated by what a new Hollywood reunion the whole thing is. Seriously, in addition to Beatty directing and starring, the film also spots memorable turns from Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, James Caan, Seymour Cassel, and fellow Bonnie and Clyde alumni Michael J. Pollard and Estelle Parsons. I could have a field day breaking down how the grim violence and despair of the new Hollywood has transformed into a live-action cartoon where the tenets of truth, justice, and the victory of law enforcement over evil are transparently pulp fantasy. It's also fascinating to link Dick Tracy to Bonnie and Clyde specifically, and how Arthur Penn's articulation of the artifice of cinema in that film's editing and sound design have become, under Beatty, far more overt in the film's visual design. Needless to say, Dick Tracy is completely striking. Is the film good, though? I'd say it is, but also not without its flaws. As spectacular as the world of the film is, Dick Tracy also barely gives it any time to breathe. Every scene is always operating at a 10, and despite that urgency, there's somehow very little narrative momentum or even coherence. Madonna's character in particular is both integral to the plot, yet also feels inessential. I was also pretty disappointed in the songs, and the film's insistence on cutting to a live performance repeatedly during the climax, which keeps halting the momentum. Ultimately, though, the film is too much of an aesthetic treat to get hung up on narrative quibbles, and Pacino especially is a hoot. Is Dick Tracy a great film? No. Is it singular and a must-see? Absolutely. I came to Altered States primarily as a science fiction fan, though my minimal experiences with Ken Russell also prepped me for some wild visions crossing religion, sexuality, and horror in a chaotic onslaught. Those expectations were useful. The film sees a then-young newcomer William Hurt playing Edward Jessup, a scientist studying states of consciousness through a series of direct experiments. And by direct experiments, I of course mean Edward locks himself in a deprivation tank and takes a lot of drugs. As a narrative, I found Altered States to be a little awkward. For one, the science fiction is pretty vaguely defined, and leans hard on New Age mysticism, but even the more straightforward plotting has problems. The film has something of an odd structure, likely owed in part to Paddy Chayefsky's source novel, where it has to cover years of character development in short bursts. Edward's marriage to Emily, the birth of their 2 kids, and separation plays out over the course of something like 5 minutes. I never felt particularly close to Edward, or anyone else for that matter, and those issues really come to bear in the ending, where it feels like the movie just sort of stops. So there's a lot here that disappoints, but visually, shit. Altered States is pretty sweet. The hallucination scenes are absolute showstoppers in the way I was hoping for, mixing 2001-esque cosmic imagery with the extreme artifice of imagined lives and primordial supernatural powers. There's also a variety of great makeup effects, which allow the film to function as a full-blown monster movie in its final third. But it isn't just the spectacular visuals that excite. The movie generally looks great. Art direction grounds the film's fantastical concepts in grungy, industrial spaces, and lighting is used to direct attention very well. The film on the whole is certainly uneven, but the highs of Altered States are too great to really deny. Last Year at Marienbad is one of the great cinematic abstractions of the international art house scene of the 50s and 60s, right up there with Bergman's Persona and Godard's Breathless, and really, it's well past time I catch up with it. Set in a luxurious hotel full of the glamorous and wealthy, Marienbad focuses on an unnamed man and woman. The man insists the two met last year and sparked the beginning of a romance, while she is adamant they've never met before. What follows is a dreamlike journey through palace halls as conversations echo through many scenes and places, and time seems to swirl around these two possible lovers. I didn't really get it. Alright. I should probably try to say at least a little more about the movie. Last Year at Marienbad certainly deserves it. Though, full disclosure, I feel a little silly trying to discuss it at all after just one viewing. A lot of my attempts to grapple with the film involve placing it within the context of director Alain Resnais's other films, namely Night and Fog and Hiroshima Mon Amour. The former is a short documentary about Nazi concentration camps, the latter is a narrative fiction where lovers reflect on the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. These films aren't just about the violence of the acts themselves, though. They're about the limitations of film to make any kind of sense of that violence. How could projected images and recorded sounds even depict such horrors, much less articulate some kind of truth about them? Perhaps Last Year at Marienbad is expanding that metatextual inquiry into broader and more abstract territory, ruminating on how movies construct an idea of truth that is unreliable, inaccurate, and malleable. That might account for the temporal and geographic leaps the film makes, and for some of its surreal images, like the famous shot of figures along a walkway all casting shadows while the trees do not, as if they aren't actually there. It's a thoughtful expansion of Resnais' previous work, though I do wonder if something is being lost in that expansion. Night and Fog and Hiroshima Mon Amour weren't just epistemological exercises in the abstract. They were each grappling with very tangible, very political acts of violence fundamental to 20th century history. There was a human component and an urgency to their esoteric questions that I don't quite feel in Last Year at Marienbad. But is there not also a violence inherent in Marienbad? One character I neglected to mention is the other man, the woman's possible husband, who suggests a kind of dominance over both our main characters. There's also the recurring image of the sort of firing squad, which resembles the manner of a gentleman's duel, and the elegant, sumptuous mansion the film takes place within, populated by the wealthy, reminds me a lot of that Walter Benjamin quote about how every achievement of civilization is also a monument to barbarism. So there is likely a violence existing in the film's subtext, but at present, I don't find it as compelling as the themes and questions in Resnais' previous work. What I do find as compelling is the film's craft. Last Year at Marienbad is shot in haunting fashion, the camera ominously gliding through austere halls as a wheezy organ fills the soundtrack. I was reminded a bit of Carnival of Souls, and more pointedly, The Shining, which I doubt would exist in the form it does now without Marienbad's influence. The film is chock full of images which aren't just thought-provoking, they're straight up beautiful, like the famous image of the shadowed bodies and shadowless trees. Never mind what it means, it looks extraordinary. And I guess that best summarizes where I currently stand on Last Year at Marienbad. I'm at something of a loss, but I'm also captivated by something that is clearly beautiful and thought-provoking. Finally, I can get to the next oh, god damn it! What am I supposed to say about this movie? How can I say anything about this movie without getting age-restricted into oblivion? I don't think I can really talk about the plot in specifics, so I'll just say that the film is a hyperlink ensemble about a collection of oddball characters who are almost all some degree of pathetic, and many suffering from psychosexual issues which verge into the violent and criminal. And the film leaves me with a bit of a conundrum. I think it's well made. I think it's broadly successful in what it sets out to do. I think occasionally it's very funny, but it's also consistently a movie that made me want to go lie down on train tracks. I guess that's just the happiness magic. Todd Solondz's ironically named Portrait of Misery is blunt in its portrayals of perverse sexual behaviors, and that matter-of-factness is in and of itself kind of compelling. The film also mines plenty of black comedy from these scenarios, aided greatly by an exceptional cast, which mixes very funny dramatic actors with full-blown comedians. The acting in general is the best part of the film, with some major standout work from the likes of Philip Seymour Hoffman, Dylan Baker, Cynthia Stevenson, and Rufus Reed. That all said, I'm not sure happiness ultimately amounts to all that much. Though all the segments are clearly linked by the three sisters, most of the stories are only occasionally interesting. The Maplewood story is really the only one with a complete narrative and character arcs. I was also at least a little intrigued by some of the bizarre places Alan's story went, but the rest just aren't very fleshed out. Like, I love Ben Gazzara, but it feels like you could chop his subplot right out and the movie would barely lose a thing of interest. Ultimately, I was probably more interested in Happiness as a provocation than I was as a movie. The audacity on display is bold, and at least a little admirable, and I did get a handful of laughs, but I'm not sure I got that much more. And when a movie asks you to spend 2 hours with perverts and PDF files, I think I do need more. My experience with Kathryn Bigelow's pre-Hurt Locker filmography has been broadly enjoyable, but also a little disappointing. I don't dislike her earlier films, but none of them have quite excited me as much as I wanted them to. At least until now. Strange Days, a 1995 sci-fi noir, is pretty damn sweet. Easily the best of Bigelow's pre-Oscar win, and quite possibly the best film of her career. The film is set in the far-off future of 1999, and concerns an illegal technology called squid, which allows people to record their own experiences and sell them on the black market. Our protagonist is Lenny, a squid dealer and all-around hustler who becomes embroiled in a murder which begets a vast and far-reaching conspiracy. The plot is itself highly involving, a layered mystery and investigation which ultimately rests on classic noir storytelling archetypes, but it's the film's world and science fiction that really makes Strange Days special. The squid technology is a very rich concept to build a movie around, mixing a 90s analog aesthetic with thoughtful commentary on the yearning for simulation and the commodification of experience. Strange Days was hardly the first sci-fi movie to explore such themes, and it wouldn't be the last, but the coding of drug dealing and addiction gives the film a unique flavor. Ultimately though, the film's primary concern is in race. Specifically the violent policing of black bodies, and how that policing is affected by citizens' ability to record that violence. In 1995, the film was responding to the Rodney King tape and the LA riots, but such themes have only become increasingly prescient in the era of smartphones, body cams, and the never-ending series of white cops being caught on camera abusing black people. The film's optimism that such technology could reform police systems is bordering on naive, but the overall commentary is still thoughtful. It helps that the squid technology is not only innately cinematic in its first-person presentation, but also plays into Bigelow's skills. Bigelow is especially good at crafting long, tracking point-of-view shots and incorporating them into set pieces. It isn't just the technical craft on display, though that itself is certainly impressive, but how Bigelow uses subjectivity to enhance verisimilitude and chaos while still achieving a clarity in presentation. The technique is elsewhere used in scenes of sexual violence, which weaponize the audience's voyeurism to chilling effect, capturing a cruelty while also avoiding being gratuitous. More conventional action scenes are no less assured in their direction, the film on the whole skillfully balancing action, science fiction, and noir. And as the cherry on top of everything else, Strange Days has an absolutely stacked cast. Everyone here is great, but Ralph Fiennes especially stands out as a pretty unique presence to put at the center of this story. His Lenny is something of a sleaze and a loser, barely holding himself together through the chaos, and that gives the film a very different tone than if a more traditional action hero had been the lead. Angela Bassett also deserves special mention for the gravity and sheer style she brings to the movie. The ultimate solution to the mystery is maybe a touch too simple, but it's hard to be too upset by that given everything else Strange Days is doing, and doing so well to boot. So this is a little embarrassing to admit, but I added The Haunted Castle to my watch list on false pretenses. I saw that title and poster and the fact that the film was directed by F.W. Murnau a year before Nosferatu, and naturally assumed it's some kind of precursor to that horror masterpiece. I got myself all excited for a similar gothic horror movie, or at the very least, a supernatural story with some expressionist visuals from one of the silent cinema's great masters, not realizing the film I was hyping up did not actually exist. As it turns out, The Haunted Castle, whose German title actually translates to Castle Vogelud, is more of a parlor mystery where a group of guests gathered at a wealthy estate for a hunting trip try to parse how a count died a few years prior. Egg on my face. I probably should have looked into the movie a little more than not at all before going all in on it, but on the other hand, look at that poster! Can you really blame me? I do at least take some amusement in continuing the lineage of dummies being sucked in by a cool title and poster. Anyway, all that out of the way, how is the film itself? Well, it's certainly no classic. It's a very talky affair which plays directly against the strengths of silent cinema, but on the other hand, it's all put together pretty well. Murnau was a master of the craft after all, and And sure enough, the haunted castle is handsomely staged and features some strong performances. Scenes like the classic Guy explains all the details of the mystery to a room of enraptured and possibly implicated guests are especially fun, as is the twist, which is pretty obvious, but it's still entertaining. There's also a dream scene where a monstrous hand reaches through the window for its victim that definitely predicts Nosferatu, and is probably worth the price of admission all by itself. So, even if I was horribly misguided in what I thought the haunted castle was about, I'm ultimately glad I watched it. Here's a confession that might get me some heat. I don't much care for Mel Brooks.
Bad taste!
I know. I admire the man's satirical bite and his skills at visual homage, but the actual comedy in Brooks's comedies rarely tickles me. That's not to say I can't find any laughs in your Young Frankensteins or The Producers, but the scattershot, throw anything at a wall and see what sticks sense of humor results in more misses than hits, at least with me. But I've always been curious about silent movie. This is partially because I just generally like silent comedies a lot and thought this material might be more to my taste, and partially because I just respect the chutzpah. Coming off an amazing 1-2 punch of hit comedies in 1974, and with carte blanche to do whatever he wanted, Brooks chose to make a full-blown silent comedy, and to make it a sizable hit to boot. I may not be a Brooks head, but you gotta respect the power move. But the kicker came when I was editing my video on AI art, and included some footage from Silent Movie. And just scanning through the film for clips to use, I laughed harder than ever before with Brooks. That was a sign. Maybe this was the one. Sure enough, Silent Movie absolutely tickled me. Hot take, but I think it's far and away the best movie Mel Brooks ever made. This is obviously largely rooted in taste and my already ingrained love of silent comedies, but I also think the world of silent slapstick is very well suited to Brooks' zany silliness. It's an environment that benefits the over-the-top gags and lowering of status Brooks is so good at. Despite being inherently old-fashioned, much of Silent Movie's humor is rooted in the then very modern acquisitions of film studios by major corporate conglomerates. Engulf and Devour is a direct dig at manufacturing company Gulf and Western purchasing Paramount Pictures in 1966. But the mockery goes deeper than a great pun. Brooks is laser-focused, not just on the bottomless greed of corporate boardrooms, but their complete lack of care for filmmaking as an art. It's a theme that's still highly relevant today, what with CEOs strip mining their own studio assets, the push to implement AI technologies, and the recent labor struggles of the actors and writers guilds. The jabs Brooks landed in 1976 against that corporate greed then remain cathartic today. Where Silent Movie falters a bit is in the story. While I like the meta element of Brooks playing a director trying to make a silent movie, and the inherent humor of a silent movie in 1976 about how bizarre a notion it is to make a silent movie in 1976, I can't help but feel like Brooks could have done a little more with the concept. Most of the film consists of Brooks and his fellow goofballs Marty Feldman and Dom DeLuise attempting to court various 70s celebrities to star in their film. It's fun to see the parade of cameos acting so silly, and I especially enjoyed getting to see Brooks' wife Anne Bancroft, but there's no real story development across these scenes, or even escalation of comedy. You could arrange each celebrity set piece in almost any order, and it wouldn't make much difference. At the end of the day though, what matters with a movie like this is whether or not you laughed. And I laughed a whole heck of a lot. El Topo is my first exposure to Alejandro Jodorowsky, and it was very deliberately chosen. The film's placement within the tropes and aesthetics of westerns, a genre I love, seemed the smartest place to start with the famed surrealist filmmaker. Sure enough, while El Topo is certainly strange, in its early moments, I didn't find it that much weirder than your average spaghetti western. Yes, it's got some strange details, like the naked kid that follows El Topo around, and some anachronisms, but the film's visual style is in line with spaghetti westerns. as is a suspenseful quick-draw sequence which culminates in an explosion of violence. Plotting is thin, but it's also present. These goons were sent by a colonel to murder some townsfolk, so El Topo sets off for revenge. Got it. But then that revenge is fulfilled early, in a scene which crosses sexual humiliation with religious imagery, and El Topo again sets off on a new quest, this time accompanied by the colonel's mistress. Now he's journeying through the desert to find and defeat 4 great gunmasters, which eventually leads to El Topo becoming an object of worship in a cave of outcasts and doing battle with religious cultists. At this point, I had to admit that the movie was in fact more bizarre than your average spaghetti western. So what is one to make of El Topo? It's hard to say on a first viewing, and for my part, I tried not to concern myself too much with decoding every bit of symbolism or visual metaphor, and just let Jodorowsky's images wash over me. Certainly, the film is concerned with the journey for spiritual enlightenment, dramatized here in such a way that the journey is both literal and an abstraction. I do think the relative grounding of the Western helps flesh that narrative out, though. This isn't just about spiritualism in a general sense. It's a story of a violent man seeking atonement for his sins, the film openly asking whether any enlightenment can outweigh a violent past. It's a classic Western tale, even if it doesn't make total sense here, and the filmmaking also sings. That Jodorowsky's surrealist visions are presented with the vibrant pop artistry of the spaghetti western makes the heady material somehow strangely inviting, even playful at times. Perhaps the best way to understand the film is more simply as an expression of mischief from its oddball director. Whatever the case, I can certainly say that I'm interested in that oddball. El Topo hasn't turned me into a Jodorowsky cultist, but I did like it, and since seeing it, my appreciation has only grown. After a long and winding road, I've come to the end of David Lynch's feature filmography, and I've saved a rather anomalous film for last. The Straight Story, which tells the true tale of aging Iowa and Alvin Straight's journey by tractor to visit his brother Lyle in Wisconsin after Lyle suffers a stroke, is certainly far gentler than anything else in Lynch's filmography. We also don't get the surrealist touches that occur elsewhere in Lynch, even in something more mainstream like The Elephant Man. On the other hand, I don't think there's any mistaking The Straight Story for someone else's work. The opening sequence alone plays like a rural twist on Blue Velvet's introduction, and certain characters, like the woman who keeps hitting the deer with her car, feel like they could have come straight out of Twin Peaks. And that's to say nothing of Alvin himself. The Straight Story only seems like a normal movie in the context of the rest of Lynch's work. By any other standard, a guy who drives a tractor across state lines is odd, and befitting Lynch's recurring interest in the strangeness of people. It can be tempting to dismiss Lynch as a guy who just makes weird movies for the sake of being weird, but he comes at this weirdness out of a genuine fascination for people and their peculiarities. With The Straight Story, we're offered a character study that doesn't strictly explain Alvin, but it does allow us to understand him at an emotional level. The supporting cast is also full of interesting faces who come in and out of Alvin's journey and prove fascinating in their own short glimpses. But it is ultimately Alvin's movie, and Richard Farnsworth more than carries it. He is warm, stubborn, and mournful, but only in modest doses, befitting a man of his character. When it comes to Lynchian aspects, what came to mind the most was actually a quote from Twin Peaks: The Return, and a rather famous quote at that. "Fix your hearts or die." In the context of that show, the quote referred to killing one's bigotries, but the line echoed through my brain during The Straight Story, or at least a modified version of it. Fix your hearts because you're going to die. Neither Alvin or Lyle have much time left, and whatever drove them apart is not worth holding on to. Better to let things go. It's a simple point, but one the film arrives at honestly and touchingly. I won't spoil who plays Lyle for those who don't know, but the final scene between the men is just perfect. Not much is said, but also everything is said, and you feel the weight of lifetimes behind the men's eyes. It's beautiful. So that is Watchlist 2 in the bag. Best film of this collection is a toss-up between The Killer and The Straight Story. The former is a sublimely awesome bit of action filmmaking that thrilled me like nothing else. The latter, a quieter but profoundly moving experience that touched something deep inside. I'd probably give the edge to The Straight Story, partly because of the added weight from David Lynch's recent passing, but also in simply being the last Lynch feature I'll ever get to see for the first time. It feels like there's a little bit less mystery left in the world now, and that is sad, but I also cherish what he's left us. Thanks, David. Now, unto the future. The time has come to compile a new watch list. 5 entries are already locked in and are on screen now. The other 5 will be decided by you. I'm looking for suggestions for what I should put on my watch list next, and will be collecting the most interesting selections for a poll to be voted on by my patrons. That poll will be posted on patreon.com/eyebrowcinema a few days after this video goes live, so if you want to actually vote, you know where to go. But please, comment below with what I should put on my watch list. I will be reading. And I will be judging.